Hello, and welcome to the New York JavaSIG's 25th anniversary event. Frank Greco founded the JavaSIG in September 1995, just 4 months after Java's formal launch in May of that year. And since then, New York JavaSIG has had nearly 300 meetings with more than 200 different speakers, many of them being Java luminaries. The group has approximately 8,000 members, and an average meeting has over 150 attendees. We're talking about real in-person meetings, not just virtual meetings. None of this would be possible without Frank Greco's ongoing leadership. He's worked tirelessly running New York JavaSIG for these many years and is an inspiration to all of us on the SIG's leadership board. So at this time, it's my great honor to present the one and only Frank Greco.
Thank you very much, Barry. Thank you very much. It's a surprise to me to be here 25 years since I started the JavaSIG many years ago. I thought I would be doing it for a few years, and here I am 25 years later. We know that the demo gods do not like me because you might see a few seconds of chaos at the beginning of this recording for people in the future that are watching this. It's just the demo gods just love me. But first, before we get started, I wanted to thank our sponsors. Certainly without our sponsors, JavaSIG couldn't exist. My wife wouldn't let it exist, paying for all the expenses. Thank you very much to O'Reilly, Pearson, and Manning, and Azul Systems for the books. I think we have like 45 books to give away. Thank you very much to JFrog for these really funky, cool t-shirts. We have 25 of those shirts to give away. Thank you to Oracle. Thank you, Sharat, for the commemorative Java coin. It sounds really, really cool. And thank you to JetBrains for the IntelliJ licenses, my favorite IDE. And also thank you to the JFuture Conference for giving us a free pass to raffle off, and to No Fluff Just Stuff, to our friend Jay Zimmerman, for where you see people like Venkat and other people talking about various topics in the No Fluff Just Stuff conferences. Thank you, Jay. He's given us 2 passes to ArchConf, which is like $2,000. So that's really cool. So it's very generous. So thank you to all of our sponsors, and thank you to our corporate sponsors, and our friends like Credit Suisse, who before the current situation, we were having meetings at Credit Suisse. So the Credit Suisse has been a good friend to the JavaSIG for many years. So I'd like to thank what we call the New York JavaSIG Leaders Group. So a few years ago, after I was running the group by myself, and by the way, I dyed my hair white just for this occasion. A few years ago, we had some people starting to ask if they can help out. So we got 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. So now we have like 8 or 9 people, and I wanted to thank them. So for the past 2 or 3 years, the success of the JavaSIG couldn't be possible with having all the leaders and my friends as well as JavaSIG leaders. So I'd like to mention them: Gene Boyarsky, Barry Bird, Sai Sharan Dante. Thank you for being a liaison for Credit Suisse. Thank you very much, Sai. Rodrigo Graciano. You've seen him as the MC and Schedule Meister for JavaSIG. Chandra Gunter, who's a Java champion, just like Gene Boyarsky. And he's responsible for, he's our social media maven and relationship with sponsors and other speakers. We have Justin Lee as our senior advisor, another Java champion. Our web mistress is Lily Lua. So Lily fixes the stuff that when I break them, she fixes the website, which I often break the website. And again, thank you to Vinay Carley for being a senior advisor, and our other Java champions in New York who are advisors, Victor Grazzi and Ray Zhang. So let me go over to, I wanted to talk real quickly. I mean, I know everyone wants to get to our elite panel of guests. I just want to give a little background on how I started the JavaSIG. I think it would be kind of cool for you to understand why it's called a JavaSIG. So just bear with me for the next 10 minutes. So back in the late 80s, when I was diving into my PC and learning about how the PC was, how it worked, and programming the, if I remember correctly, the Motorola 6845 CRT controller and writing a video game, I thought there was a lot of potential. And I said, this is like really, really cool for big companies. But then when I looked at what big companies were doing with PCs, is that their big innovation was having the PC act as a 3270 emulator. That was the big innovation. So I said, that's okay, but that's not really that innovative. Either you have, a PC acting as a 3270 emulator, and for the younger developers, a 3270 emulator is a terminal to connect to mainframe applications. Or you would get a board for your PC. It was mainframe on a board. It was like a Motorola 68K processor that you plug into, but it was like a mainframe. So it was like mainframe stuff. And I said, this wasn't very innovative. So, kind of stuck with me. I was kind of like disappointed. So while I was at AT&T and I had a stint at Bell Labs back then, I got introduced to a friend of mine told me about like Sun Workstation. So you got to check this out. It's like really, really cool. So I was fascinated. Like this Maverick company was doing really, really cool stuff. And they had all these like cool presentations, right? There was the stuff on distributed computing. There was stuff on windowing systems, advanced BSD, Unix programming. And I thought, this is great, but they were always in the Valley. There was always in Mountain View or Cupertino or other places in the Valley. So I had the opportunity to ask one of the execs. And it wasn't just Sun, there were other companies back then that were doing really cool stuff. I had the opportunity to ask face-to-face to an executive, a VP level person of a workstation company that came to New York. And I said, when are you going to have these cool talks in New York? This is how all the developers here, like, I'm working at Bell Labs. I want some cool stuff. And I said, when are you having in New York? His answer was, there are no real programmers in New York. And, the little WTF button goes over my head. And he said, all the real programmers are in the Valley. And I was like, So it kind of got me a little ticked off. So I decided to bring these talks to New York myself. And I knew that companies like Sun Microsystems were after the investment banks as customers. So I knew I had a lot of buddies in the investment banks. They came over from AT&T. They doubled their salary by crossing the river from New Jersey to New York. So they were all good developers. And I said, like, are you guys interested in stuff? Said, yeah, this is really, really cool. Let's if you have a meeting, I'll come. So I started the New York Sun user group back then. And that started to grow. And we had, every month we had really cool talks. And because there were investment bankers, potential customers, Sun got interested in that. So that was really cool. And then in September 95, I was asked by a Sun person in the New York office, could you do a talk on Java at the Equitable Center? And I said, sure, what is it? And if I remember correctly, I think it was Peter Kestenbaum told me to go talk to James and he'll explain it to you. And I was actually doing news programming, network extensible window system, which another James creation. So I found out what Java was. And I said, this is really, really cool. So that day when I gave this talk on Java, it was like an hour talk. I said, anybody interested in starting a user group? And we had 4 to 5 people show up. So I said, this is really, really nice. So let's start a special interest group. And historically, back then, the late 80s, early 90s, a SIG was like a special interest group was a special part of a bigger group that had special interests. So we had the JavaSIG as part of the New York Sun user group. So we had that name. I happened to be also running a C Unix SIG of the New York PC group. So we kept the term SIG. But over time, the interest in Java just overwhelmed the interest in sysadmin stuff for Sun. So we told the sysadmin folks to go over to the Linux community. There's plenty of user groups in New York. There's like 2 or 3 really good ones. And we would just focus on Java. So then the group just dropped the Sun user group part, and we basically were New York JavaSIG. And we sort of took the spaces out, we just made it New York JavaSIG, camel case. And I think I kept the camel case because of news, since news it was camel case. It was always tough to type. So from 4 to 5 people to now we have 8,700 members. So we've grown over 1,000 times. And we've had like about 220 unique speakers, and many speakers have spoken many times to our group. So we've had a lot of really, really good speakers, and the success of the group is the leaders, our helpers here, and also to all the speakers. So thank you very much. And Java just continues to evolve. I mean, we've had our ups and downs with Java, but now it's just this increased interest thanks to the new release train and the new features. So really, and there's a lot of cool stuff that's coming. Hopefully we'll hear about that from Brian. It just continues to evolve. So this is a really, really good time for Java. And thankfully we have a team of New York leaders to help us continue to grow the JavaSIG. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists, which we're really lucky to have 4 gentlemen who are, in my opinion, instrumental to the success and growth of Java. And I don't want to read their bios. I mean, you can go to many places. You can go to LinkedIn and see the bios of our 4 elite panelists. But I just want to give just why I think these men are important to Java. So let me start with Sharat Chander. So Sharat is just a good guy. He's just a really, really good guy. He's a friendly guy. And he's fostered an international community that's friendly and inclusive for all developers. Everybody was included in the party. So it's not a private, the Java community, it's not a private club, but it's open to all. And as long as I've known Char, he's been a model of friendship and community leadership. So you can't underestimate the power of friendship and community. And when you start, when you have a technology and when you foster the growth of a technology, it's really important to be friendly and inclusive. Just as an example, when Tim Berners-Lee was starting the web, and this is late 80s, we all thought the World Wide Web was a stupid name, but who are we? He wanted to find a way of distributing documents back and forth, right? As we all know. So he wanted a simplified FTP, a downscaled FTP. So at that time, there was something called Gopher, which was essentially a scaled down FTP. He went to those guys and he said that he'd like to use Gopher as the basis of his World Wide Web idea. They were a little snarky, and they didn't agree with him, and they were a little bit snarky. So he was a little miffed, and he backed off, and he didn't use Gopher. And so if those guys were a little bit more friendly, we could have been using Gopher as the prime protocol right now. But it's really important to be friendly, and Char, it's because of you that the community has grown. So thank you very much for that. Brian Goetz is the language architect for Java. When I say he's a steward of the language, I'm not kidding. Brian's given several talks to the JavaSIG. And actually, I think, Brian, you first spoke before you joined Sun, I believe, way back in the early days of the JavaSIG. And so Brian has to be not just a technologist and a Java person, Java expert, but Brian has to be a politician and a thoughtful negotiator, right? So people are hitting Brian for why don't you put this into the language? How about this? How about this? How about that? And Brian has to think that first there's backward compatibility, right? That's a critical part of Java is backward compatibility. So Brian has to say no a lot of times. And I like to thank Brian for saying no a lot of times. It's very, very important. So thank you. This is, for Brian to steward, to lead the Java language. It's like building a bridge while you're on it, right? So you got to be really careful, but you want to have a direction, and you can't lose focus. So thank you, Brian. So next is James Gosling, and I think we all know James as the father of Java. And my first encounter with James was back in the late 80s when, as I mentioned, the network extensible windowing system, which to this day it has a soft spot in my heart as one of my favorite windowing systems. Although doing object-oriented polymorphism with PostScript dictionaries was challenging, James.
I regret many choices in that. I apologize profusely.
So at AT&T, my manager came to me and he said, "Here's a tape." Back then we used tapes to distribute software, and he said, "This is news. You're going to maintain it." So I had to maintain the code because we were working on the document distribution system at AT&T that was hypertext hypermedia. This is prior to the web, which we use news as our front end. So I had the honor of looking at all your go-to statements, James, in news.
Yeah,
I think you told me. I asked you why, and you said, "Well, it's the fastest way of getting there from here." I said, "Oh, okay." So I mean, after talking about Java, when I was told to reach out to you, I found out within 10 minutes that Java wasn't just another C language, which I thought it was. So I basically started a company that to do Java consulting for large companies, which was very successful. And most of my career, I want to thank you for inventing Java. Our last, but certainly not least, is Venkat Subramaniam. So I've been an educator most of my life, and I understand the value of mentorship. And when I worked at AT&T Bell Labs, one of the best things that AT&T Bell Labs did, when you walked in, you were assigned a mentor. And that mentor was responsible for you from a salary point of view. So it was important. And they were responsible for guiding you, teaching you, and inspiring you. So that was really, really important. Venkat is a mentor. When you go to a conference and you see that when Venkat is speaking, you don't even look at the other sessions. You say, like, "I'm going to that talk." Right away, I'm going to that talk. It's just basically a no-brainer. So if you ever want to be inspired, and people that have not seen Venkat speak, he just uses a text editor as his slides. And there's a few words per slide. And he just goes off, and the audience is just like staring at him, listening to every single word, looking for inspiration. So if you ever want to be inspired, go to a Venkat talk. So Venkat, thank you very much. Kudos to you. So at this point, let me turn it over to Java champion Gene Boyarsky to ask the panelists all the questions that came in through Eventbrite. And Gene, you'll talk about how people can submit questions live too. It's all yours,
Absolutely.
Gene.
At this point, we're going to have the leaders drop off of the YouTube so that we have more room to see our panelists. There's a Google form in the chat of the YouTube live session. We've posted it a couple of times and we'll post it more throughout. The idea there is that we can have you enter a form so we know who's eligible to win, and we'll be drawing the winners about midway through. We'll be announcing the winners between 8:30 and 8:45, so stick around to find out who our winners are of those awesome prizes. One more piece of administration before we continue on to the panel. Frank thanked everybody else, but we have to thank Frank. Without Frank, we wouldn't have this group and we wouldn't be here today. So the leaders of the group chipped in and got Frank a $25 Amazon gift card in honor of the 25th anniversary. Unfortunately, we're not here in person, so I will have to chop this up into a million pieces, put all of the bits in the email, and send it to Frank, which I will do after the panel. And with that, it's time to get started. Our first question is for James. James, when did you start thinking of inventing Java? Where did it come from?
It was a project at Sun that was looking at things that the computer industry was ignoring, which at the time was, well, there was a lot of stuff we were ignoring, but what we focused on mostly was consumer electronics and embedded electronics. And we started building prototypes because that's the way, you know, a bunch of engineers learn. And we kept having problems with the way that things were going using C++. And then I said, well, we could fix that. And my job was to like do that. And every time I fixed something, I found 5 other things to fix. And, you know, by the time we released it, like 4 years later, it only bore a small resemblance to C++.
Cool. We do have a bunch of prepared questions, but for anyone in the audience, if you think of more questions, put them in the YouTube chat. We'll be collating them and asking our favorites out loud. Our second question is for Brian. All of our initial questions are about the beginning. Brian, when did you first encounter Java? Was it before or after you started working at Sun? Brian is on mute.
Sorry, yes, I was on mute. It was long before I started at Sun. It was probably 1996. It was the Java 1.1 days. And I had picked up a consulting project that had something to do with Java, and that was pretty cool. It was a new thing to learn, so I enjoyed it. And so I went looking for more projects that had to do with Java. And, after, some amount of time working with Java, I had this realization that I hadn't had a bug in like a year. That I would write stuff and it would just work. And I had never had that experience before because previously I'd been programming in C, and I make a lot of dumb mistakes when I code. And the C compiler didn't catch any of those. And so I spent untold hours chasing down, memory management issues. And when I started programming Java, all the dumb mistakes were caught by the compiler. And I was able to just do what I wanted. And it was like I'd been programming for probably 20 years already at that point, but it was like the light bulb had just gone on. That wow, it really can be this easy. And it really, that changed, that realization changed the direction of my career.
Cool. So no more dumb mistakes. Now we all have to make smart mistakes. Got it. Sharat, how did you discover that you were going to start leading the international Java community?
Lead, boy, that's a pointed word. But first off, congratulations to the NYSIG, to Frank, to all my panelists, and more importantly for everyone that's watching, because it does take a village. But I'm standing on shoulders of a lot of individuals that put effort in terms of building out an ecosystem. This isn't just one person, one face, one personality. A lot of this goes back to what started at Sun, which was you don't just build technology, you build an ecosystem that then fosters that technology. And so, I've always been, it's not me, it's you. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it as in, I'm not looking for, the attention, the FaceTime, to garner the focus. It's really about end users. It's about their usage of Java. It's about sharing and collaborating, understanding best practices and use cases. And that just comes from a little bit of my background in teaching, which is you want to empower someone for success. And so that's why I've literally invested my career in this, because it's the ethos of what Java is all about.
We've all mentioned Sun a few times. Does anyone remember how many years ago that it's been Oracle?
Vividly, because I came in through that acquisition. So very much so. There's two dates I remember. One was December 18th, 2000 was the day I started at Sun, and then February 15th, 2010, which is when I started at Oracle. Those dates will be ingrained in my memory for life.
Got it. Thank you. I could look it up, but I figured at least 2 of you should know that off the top of your head. And our fourth and final, how did you start with Java? Venkat, you came from the Agile world. What was the first way that you encountered Java?
First of all, I want to say thanks for having me here. It's a great pleasure. Congratulations to the group. I've thoroughly enjoyed every opportunity to be there with the group and speak, including the last time when we had a major snowstorm in New York. And any day I would do that again, absolutely. Well, I spent decades teaching C++ and using C++ for work. Much like what Brian said, my days were involved in, I remember the days when I would program during the day and I would go start teaching in the evening, the stuff that I'm working on. And I cannot tell you how many times this is absolutely silly, but as I'm teaching the class, I would pause and say, darn it, now I know why the code didn't work. And I would literally call my colleagues then that night and say, I found that bug, we need to fix it and we need to change 300 classes. So that pain, I always say that you know a C++ programmer by counting the number of scars on their body. So when I saw Java, it's kind of little surprising to see the place where Java came out. I remember the birth of browsers and the ability to use applets. Sincerely, didn't really excite me as much the first time I saw it. But then noticing, call me silly, but I really admire concepts that make me think about, wow, that's different, that's special. And I remember spending time with interface inheritance compared to what I had in Java, C++, where we had multiple inheritance, which only gave us pain. And so that really drew me into the language, knowing it is so much like C++, and yet it's not. And Java removed a lot of things that you got hurt over and over and over in C++. And that really convinced me. And soon enough, I was in the industry teaching Java for various companies that were adopting it. But the journey to learn the language and the journey to appreciate the design constructs, absolutely, it's ever in my mind. I cannot forget those days of learning those concepts.
Sharat, right now the Java community is all over the world. You go to a conference and there's people from user groups from everywhere. How did it get there? How did it grow from a small thing to an international community?
At the center of it all is that concept of sharing. So you advance knowledge by this notion of information transfer. And at Sun, that was mission critical to the success of Java. If some of you might remember, I'm showing I actually dyed my hair black so it didn't show. Just kidding. But, we started with the Java Development Center connection, I should say. And that platform allowed, things like blueprints and documentation and best practices. And that's a one-way mechanism, but we learn better when we share and collaborate. And so I think fundamentally the start and launch of the Java user group program fostered that notion of sharing and collaboration. And that's what's, brought so much life into the language and the innovation, is because we're all looking to do better. And there's a saying my father always says, which is, less than you know. I always thought that was rather interesting, which means every day there's an opportunity to learn. And that's kind of like the ethos within the ecosystem, which is I can be better at what I'm doing. I learned so much from Venkat in terms of when he speaks. Internal meetings, Brian will say something, I'm like, oh, that's something I didn't know. Or even tangentially now, the distance between me and James might be a little further away now, but there are times he will post something that is very insightful. And we all collectively have to take our blinders off during our workday and remember there's so much learning we can get from our peers to the left and right of us. And the user group program is a great mechanism for it. Whether it's in person or even online, that learning opportunity exists even today.
James, why is it named Java?
Because it made the lawyers happy.
Well, big companies have lawyers. That's good to know.
Yeah, well, it's one of these things where actually the engineers and people involved, we had a name. The lawyers did not like it. We anguished for a very long time. That didn't work. We came up with a long list of words, most of which we thought stank, and then handed them to the lawyers and said, go top to bottom, pick the first one that passes. And lucky number 4.
Yeah, that's not too far down the list. I'm sure they said no before you gave them the list, though. Brian seems to be at a bar, but the rest of us haven't been to a conference in a while. Thinking back to when the world was open, what are some memories you have from a conference, or what's a fun story that's open to anybody?
For me, there's 2 memories that really stick out. One is the fact that I was at the very first Java 1 in '96 as an attendee, just as I was learning, making that transition from financial forecasting and economics into programming. I got a chance to go to Java 1. Like, oh my God, what is this? Like, is it coffee? Is it what is going on? And you'll never forget that first experience. And to think that launched me into a career to focus on the thing that I was learning. Like, I had to pinch myself. Sun opened their doors to me, and those doors to have stayed open for so long. The second one was, this is never easy for me to sometimes talk about, but filling the shoes of John Gage. The transition from Sun to Oracle was a huge ripple effect. And the fact that my peers asked me to sort of fill his shoes as sort of like the moderator of Java 1, I will never forget the trust the community had in me to do that, because for sure, I still don't feel like I can fill those shoes. I can never do it as well as he did, and he can. But that was very inspirational back in 2009. So thank you.
Does anyone else have a memory?
I've got several stories to tell, but I'll just say that for me, the most humbling experience is to talk about the technology when the authors of the technology are in the audience. That's nerve-wracking, and at the same time, I don't know what word to use. Very humbling, that's all I can say. When I gave a talk on spearheading the future of programming, that was probably the hardest keynote I ever gave, because James was in the audience. I don't know if James even remembers that. And Brian was in the audience, and Mark Reinhold. And here are the people who have created the most famous language in the world. And what an idiot I am trying to talk about what programming languages should be in front of them. So, but it was a very humbling experience, and I'm very, very thankful for that opportunity.
Okay. Any more favorite conference memories?
So my first experience speaking at a conference was a sort of an unusual path into conference speaking. It was Java 1 probably in 2002. And they had managed to book Doug Lee into a room that seated 200, and there were 1,000 people who wanted to see his talk, and there were a lot of angry people in the hallway. And somebody, and they asked Doug if he could repeat his talk, the next day, and he couldn't because he had a flight out that night. And somebody said, "I'll bet Brian could do Doug's talk." I had never spoken in public in front of more than 10 people before. And I actually didn't see Doug's talk because I was one of those 800 people in the lobby. But of course, I was involved with him, in the creation of the stuff that was the subject. So I at least had some passing familiarity. And so I printed out Doug's slides and went home and studied them and practiced, what seemed like 200 times. And the next morning, I had my first conference talk in front of 1,000 people who were all kind of angry to not be getting Doug and be getting this no one that they've never heard of. And it was all downhill from there. That was the hardest talk I ever had to give.
That is awesome. And it's kind of like being a speaker before they were all known. Those 1,000 people saw Brian before everyone knew who he was.
Yeah. And they didn't throw anything. So that was good.
Yeah. Going back to the name of the language, James, if it wasn't called Java and you didn't have to deal with lawyers, what would it be called?
I think my favorite from the list was Lyric.
Nice. Just a fun fact. Speaking of fun facts, Sharat, do you have any statistics about the Java community that you could share with us? Sharat's on mute.
I am. I apologize. Yes. So, it's amazing what's transpired over 25 years in terms of just the sheer size of the ecosystem. But estimates are anywhere between 9.5 to 10 million developers that are active developers using Java. Not DIY, not in your garage, but actual in production developers using Java, which is phenomenal. The last estimate in terms of user groups, somewhere around 350 to 400, depending on some of the consolidation that's been happening around Java user groups. I believe there's a little over 300 Java champions, basically Java luminaries that speak around the world that extend the message and truth of what Java stands for and represents. And by golly, it would be countless number of universities and institutions that have Java within their curricula. And that's very inspiring. To me, what's most important is if we can start educating that next generation beyond just academia, but reaching the, anywhere from like the 8 to 18-year-old demographic and just show them the sheer power and value of Java and make it more approachable for them. And I think we're doing that with some of the language enhancements and simplification and reducing verbosity and some of the tools. The next generation is well set up to adopt Java when they make it into the workforce.
Cool. Those are some big numbers. What's the farthest away that you personally have traveled to go to a Java user group?
So I went and visited South Africa in Johannesburg, Josie Jug, yay, Josie Jug, little shout out there. And I flew from San Francisco to Singapore, then made a connection to India, then all the way to South Africa. But there's a bunch of visits along the way, but that's the furthest south I've ever gone. And maybe one day they'll have a user group meetup in Antarctica, who knows? But that would be exciting to see.
Got to get some people there first.
Yeah.
Speaking of big trips, Venkat, what's the longest hike you've ever been on?
Oh, I would say I just did about 12-mile hike a few weeks ago, but it didn't start out as that, like anything else, like programming. So we just kept saying, we'll go to the next rock. And the next thing we know, we were far away. So, yeah.
Nice. That's a lot of rocks. 25 years was a long time ago, starting to get a little bit closer to the present. James, did your vision of Java come true? And was it originally designed for Internet of Things, or was that a happy coincidence that it wound up there?
Well, it actually started there, right? The stuff that we were building originally was devices. And we were talking to people who did everything from control systems for locomotives to elevators to consumer electronics devices. And the happy accident is that it worked for enterprise developers. And, the several people have said that, stuff just works. And one of the things that comes out of like talking to people in the embedded and consumer electronics world is that stuff can't fail, right? Because there are actual consequences. If it's a locomotive, something goes wrong and like people die. So I had been writing C code for a long time, and just how flaky, it doesn't matter how talented you are at C code, it takes a long time to get stuff solid. And so that sort of mindset really drove things for me.
Did the idea to use bytecode instead of machine code come from another language, or was it something that was invented for Java?
It was actually a thesis proposal that I tried to get my advisor to accept when I was in grad school, but my advisors thought it was a bad idea.
Okay, that's fair.
I had spent like 5 or 6 months on it and got shot down and did something else. But then, doing this other thing, I was like, ooh, that actually solves some real problems here. So went back to it.
Okay, cool. For anyone who knows about it or wants to answer about this, the current hardware that people are very interested in is machine learning hardware. what's Java doing for artificial intelligence or machine learning these days?
So I think I think we can make an analogy of something that happened like 15 years ago, which was in web development. And this kind of connects to James' previous point in an indirect way. So, about 15 years ago, Ruby got really popular, and a lot of people were really excited about building data-driven web applications in Ruby, and at least the developers were. And then when it came time to deploy these applications, it was kind of a disaster. And a lot of startups that had originally written in Ruby, the ones that survived, they recoded their application in Java. And then sort of the meme, surrounding that James Governor coined was, when web shops grow up, they become Java shops. And the reason I bring that up is that people tend to think about Java primarily as the language, because that's where, as developers, we look at code all day, and so we think about it in terms of the language. But the real value of Java is in the runtime, and it's the rock solid stability of the runtime that has enabled it to be so successful. And so if you look at some of the wild and wacky stuff that people do with enterprise development, where you have these enormous applications with class paths 3,000 elements long, which I'm sure we never really thought was going to be the case when when we first thought, like, well, let's have a path where we go look for classes to load, and it just works. And so, people may have been initially attracted to Java because it's a fun and reliable language to program in, but people stayed for the reliability and for the deployment story. And I think the same thing is going to happen in machine learning. So right now, Python dominates in machine learning because Python is basically the new MATLAB. It makes it super easy to throw a model together, sucking in data from here and there and integrating it and all of that. But I think they're going to have all the same problems that Ruby had in deployment, where you can't repeatedly deploy a model because you don't know where your data came from. And you have this jury-rigged Rube Goldberg machine by which the model training is configured. And this is an area where Java's rock-solid performance and deployment story and ability to run on new kinds of hardware that were not imagined at the time Java was originally written, really shines.
Okay. Venkat, oh, go for it.
Sorry, I was going to go further from what Brian said. Totally agree with him. But the other aspect that's going to change this also is one of the real strengths of Java, in addition to what Brian said, is the community. And you have, if you really look at reactive programming, that's a really good example to learn from. Even though the ideas, originated a long time ago and also influenced by various other places, including Microsoft Research, the adoption by Java developers really made a big difference in the area of reactive programming. That's exactly what I'm expecting in machine learning as well, is that there's going to be the community that's going to drive this very deeply. And so the strength is, on one end is the platform on which Java is running. On the other end is the users who are actually leading the efforts in Java. So I think it's got the perfect storm for that in that sense.
It's like you read my mind. I was going to ask about part of that. Sharat, Java is 25 years old. Happy birthday, Java. Love your virtual background there. What's something that you're looking forward to that's upcoming in Java, either planned or after that?
So it's a anticipation every 6 months now. So no longer are we waiting for something earth-shattering to happen in terms of our release cycle, where there's some sort of evolutionary big bang moment that happened every 2 or 3 years. Now with the shift to the 6-month release cadence, there's incremental innovation. So there's a moment of celebration every 6 months that I believe developers can keep up with, such that they can then innovate. So we take away that friction of having to wait multiple years. You sort of forget about, what are my dependencies? What's going to happen? How long does it take me to absorb some of that new functionality? It's now been broken down into smaller moments. And so oftentimes, Brian, even Venkat, I'm sure even James are asked, what is the next big feature of Java? I don't believe there is a big feature that is forthcoming. There are many projects that are now being worked on in OpenJDK, which will come to bear fruition every 6 months as different functionality comes forward. For me, as I was mentioning, simplicity is important. I'm fascinated with Project Amber. I know Brian is leading a lot of the efforts around this, but anything we can do to ensure the language has reduced verbosity, is simple to write, but more importantly, simple to maintain, just makes it much more approachable. And that to me is extremely important. So for me personally, I'm fascinated with all of the efforts around Amber.
Okay, cool. What's the most surprising use of Java any of you have seen?
Well, I'm sure many will never forget that Java helped the Mars rover project back in 2006, 7. I might be getting the year wrong now. That's a little bit of the gray hair talking, but to see mission control in NASA utilizing Java to power the Mars rover from millions of miles away is something I know I'll never forget. But for me personally, seeing my mother actually use Java when she worked at NASA I'm like, wait, really? My mother is learning Java. She's been a Fortran and COBOL programmer for her entire life. And here she is already expanding Java's utility at NASA. And so that was one of those proud moments where I was like, I got mom hooked on something. That usually it's the other way around. So, yep.
Anybody else?
I would say all of it, and that's what excites me really, honestly. When you talk about the word general purpose, it couldn't be any more general purpose. I've been to restaurants which use Java for their systems, to companies that do finance and insurance, and I mean talk about every single industry they are using Java, and it's just unbelievable in what kind of business people use it. And that's what just absolutely fascinates me, is like, where do I not see it? I would be surprised when I don't, I think.
Okay. Question for Brian, a little bit of the past, a little bit of the future, a little bit time to stop doing. What upcoming innovations with threads and async programming are you most proud of or looking forward to?
So I'm really looking forward to Project Loom delivering. And the reason for that is, so Venkat a few minutes ago mentioned reactive programming. And, reactive programming, on the one hand, is very cool. And on the other hand, always felt to me it'd be a little bit of a dancing bear, where the thing that's notable about the dancing bear is not necessarily that it dances well, but that it's pretty cool that a bear can dance at all, right? And, reactive offers you this deal with the devil of, the good thing it offers you is the ability to have many, many more concurrent activities going on in the same machine without having to worry about, well, I can only practically create 1,000 or a few thousand threads. On the other hand, it completely takes over your entire programming model. And so all of your control flow is expressed through the reactive library, and good luck if it doesn't do exactly what you need it to do, and good luck debugging it if you don't know what if it's not doing the right thing. And the essence of Project Loom is to sort of go back to what threads were in the first place, right? So if you think back to the time before threads, and I was doing concurrent programming before threads, and it sucked. And threads gave you this amazing ability to pretend the world was sequential. And if something was going to block, you just let it block. And because sequential code is code that humans can reason about. And so threads were, this amazing invention because it took our code, which used to be these bowls of spaghetti, and allowed us to write sequential straight line code we could think about. And what Project Loom says is, that programming model that we had, threads, it was really awesome. The thing that wasn't good about threads is you can't create millions of them. So let's make it so you can create millions of them so we can keep using that programming model that we actually understand. And I think that's a really good example of the sort of innovation that Java, manages to pull off over and over again, which is not jumping at the latest fad, which in this case might be reactive, but instead looking at, well, what's the underlying problem? Can we fix the underlying problem so people can just get their work done? And I think that's a real success story. And I think people will really be quite surprised about, where was this all our lives?
Nice.
if I can tag along to that, I like to step back a little bit and think about this from the programming model. And the way that I see this is, for me, the aha moment was back in time, the structure of sequential code was very different from the structure of concurrent code. The minute we introduce threads, we turn easy to maintain code into a monster in front of us. And what I really liked about the Java Stream API is the structure of sequential code is the same as the structure of parallel code. And that to me is like music to my ears, because I can write code sequentially, I can make it parallel, within limits very easily. The reason I'm excited about Project Loom is the structure of synchronous code can now be the same as structure of asynchronous code. And to me, that blows my mind. And that's the real reason why I'm excited about it, is because it's a win to the programmers, because they can conceptualize a sequential code and then make it asynchronous very easily without having to change the structure of the code and get the performance out of it. So that's one of the reasons why I think, in addition to all the other benefits, it's going to make a huge difference to the programmers.
We were curious if any of you had questions for each other. That would be fun to see what you would ask.
So James, are you ever going to come back and work on Java with us?
I don't know. I feel like I got badly burned out on language arguments a long time ago. And, I started feeling like, the hard problems were elsewhere. But, lately I've been sort of wondering about going back to it, but sort of the selfish version of it, which is, okay, if I didn't have to make anybody happy except me, what would it be like? I had a really strange experience a while ago. I had built a prototype of a system at Amazon, and I sort of went through the, convincing people, oh, this is a good idea. And then engineers started joining the project. And at some point, when the project had got to about 15 or 20 people, they staged an intervention. It was, kind of like if you're an alcoholic and your family wants to inform you that you're an alcoholic. Because my coding style was really unusual. I like to, I favor density. I don't see code the way most people. I don't read code top to bottom. I just look at it and see it. And this sort of intervention over coding style, because nobody was happy trying to keep up with my coding style. So, it's like several runs through massive reformatters and they were all happy again. And, a lot of it was like, where do the braces go? And how do you indent this? And what do variable declarations look like? And, how many statements can you put on the line? And, there's a part of me that says, maybe James' normal form is like the kernel of something else.
I guess to Brian's point, once part of the Java community, always part of the Java community. So the door's open, James. Well, you're welcome to come in anytime.
Yeah.
So we've got a recruiting pitch in front of almost 200 people live. Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other questions for each other?
I do, because I always find this fascinating, because we end up having conversations purely on the technology and the advancements and the history. But, to me, it's always a personal story. And so when we take our blinders off from the work we do, I like to know what's happening sort of behind the scenes that sort of motivates us. And so my question's for Brian. So when you're not architecting the language of Java, what books are on your desk and what are you reading right now?
So my desk is a mess, but there are a few books on my desk. The book that is like almost always on my desk is this one. Can the
that doesn't work with a virtual.
Doesn't work. Okay, this is Pierce's Types and Programming Languages, which is probably the single most important computer science book I think that's ever been written. It is just a masterful treatment of type systems. And then the other thing is the Learn Something New book. So I'm reading several books on category theory, trying to beef up, some of the gaps in my education. So that's what I've got on the top of this very messy pile right now.
Well, I'll ask a question to Sharat. What would you want the next generation of developers to learn from the older guys like you and me? I'm absolutely fascinated by our children growing up to become young in the workforce, leading the next generation. So what's your advice for the next generation?
Yeah, this kind of goes beyond just the notion of quality programming and knowledge transfer and sharing. For those of us that now have kids, we live this in real time, but there's a sense right now in the world we live in of a sort of me first attitude, and that doesn't foster communication, strong collaboration, and strong cooperation. And so if I could pass on some wordly advice to that next generation, is sharing is caring. I know that gets overused very often, but let's be honest, it is the ethos of what makes Java Java, which is the notion of sharing and collaboration. If that doesn't continue forward, we're in trouble. And so that next generation that's going to stand on our shoulders and charter this forward for the next 25 years and beyond need to ensure they're carrying forward the ethos and the virtues of what has made Java so successful. And if we walk away from that, I think there can be real harm. But if we reinforce that through meetups like this in the world we live in, with having to do things online, but when the world reopens, really strengthen and reinforce that notion of community collaboration and cooperation. If we don't do that, there can be harm. But I don't actually envision that. I have a great deal of hope for the next generation. There's always growing pains, and that sort of let me go rebel a little bit. But if we're thoughtful and patient, I believe the next generation will realize just how meaningful Java is and what has made it possible to succeed and thrive for 25 years. And the next 25 years and beyond, I think, look very promising.
That was a great question. We may do another round of ask each other questions a little later if you've had some more questions for inspiring. Those were great. Brian, we know you like cats. Can you tell us about something your cats did during the pandemic that was either helpful or less than helpful?
So we got 2 new cats about a year ago, and we thought we were adopting a bonded brother and sister pair that were going to cuddle together on the couch, which is not what happened. And we discovered actually that they want to be indoor-outdoor cats, and so they insisted on being let out. And we've gotten from our neighbors a sequence of photos and stories about the troubles that they've managed to get into in the neighborhood, including sneaking into their various houses and such. So they're sort of like the neighborhood ambassadors. Everybody knows them, and thank God our neighbors are tolerant of these creatures wandering around, killing all the rodents in the neighborhood.
Our next question is for all 4 of you. Speaking of cats, Java has enterprise, embedded, desktop, and probably a few other things I'm not thinking of. What is one feature in Java that you think people in all of those groups should be aware of? I'm hoping that all 4 of you will name a feature.
Well, I'd go for lambdas as the first thing.
Yep. For me, and whether this is controversial or not, is modularity. To me, it's all about ensuring the application I'm building utilizes the libraries and frameworks and that it needs. And so, I don't like to carry baggage that I don't need to have on my shoulder. And so I really appreciate the fact that we now have a modular platform that can really allow developers to be efficient.
My vote would be for what they actually don't see. And that is, I cannot tell you how many countless discussions I've had with programmers where they immediately ask the P word, what about performance? And one thing that has, continuously surprised me about Java is the features were not thrown together based on infatuation. They were deliberately implemented so the industry can use it very effectively. So I often say, let go of the assumptions, let go of the fear, and let put the trust in the people who developed this, because it is not a feature that is just to be used. It is to serve the purpose it was intended for. And that's what I do oftentimes. I open the bytecode and take a look at what it's doing to assure myself that this is actually done really well, not just on the surface, but all the way through as well.
Brian, are you able to answer this, or is this like asking you to name your favorite child?
Well, no, I think I like Venkat's answer because, it reminds us that features are a means to an end, right? I think that if people spent more time thinking about writing clear, readable code that couldn't possibly do the wrong thing and stopped worrying about performance, they would actually write more performant code. Because most of the things people do in the name of something that they think is going to be faster is often neither faster nor, less error prone nor more correct. But like, to connect to James's answer, lambdas are awesome, but if you really want to understand lambdas, you first have to understand generics. That what we did with lambdas, builds very, very much on top of the generic type system in some surprisingly subtle ways. And a lot of developers have learned just enough about generics to make the red squiggly lines in their IDE go away. But I think it is an investment that every Java developer should make to really understand generics, because it's not as hard as it looks, and it will help you understand the other features better.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and back to the point about performance. One of the principles, or sort of meta principles, that sort of stuck with the Java evolution over the years has been, to try to be as advanced as possible, but to not really give up performance gratuitously. Early on, I felt a lot of pressure to do something like value types. I could not figure out how to do value types without giving up a huge amount of performance. And I would rather leave something out than put something wrong in. And I couldn't figure out what the right thing was. And I'm still waiting. How you doing there, Brian?
We're doing pretty well. So about 6 years ago, James and I were on a panel, and he turned to me and said something about value types. We had just announced Project Valhalla, and he said, "This is awesome. I've wanted to do this since before Java was a thing, and you do realize you've taken on 6 PhD theses here." And I remember thinking, I was hoping it was more like 2, but James is pretty smart. He's probably right, and he was right. I would say we're about four theses into it, and we can see the downhill from there.
Yay.
Cool. We're going to take a 30-second
I got a bunch of code to rewrite just for that.
Awesome.
We're going to take a 30-second break for a brief commercial. The commercial is, remember that in the YouTube live chat, we've been posting a link to enter to our raffle. Just under half of the participants in the YouTube live session have entered, so your chances are good. This is the last time I'll be announcing it, and the cutoff will be shortly, where we start tabulating the winners. So if you wish to enter to win some really cool stuff, this is your last time. Thank you for that commercial interruption. Back to our regularly scheduled talk about Java features. James, one of the most frequently asked questions in advance when we were preparing this was, why isn't byte unsigned, or why isn't there an unsigned type? Could you enlighten us for that?
Well, it was kind of weird. So at the time, one of the issues was that the different versions of the different C compilers did different things. And I went around to a bunch of people and said, okay, explain to me what you think unsigned does. And I had a bunch of like puzzle questions that involved, operators like, plus and multiply and relationals. And pretty much everybody got them wrong. And even people from Sun's compiler group would get them wrong, because people, when they think about unsigned, they mostly reason about them as though they're like they have more bits than they actually have. And then I went through a whole lot of C code looking at, well, what are people doing with unsigned? And the unsigned and signed are really similar for a lot of operators, like for plus and minus, they're the same thing. And the only thing that I could find that really made a difference was unsigned right shift. So I just did unsigned right shift and left the other stuff out because I couldn't figure out how to explain it.
Interesting. Our next question is for all four of you. We've talked a lot about the importance of backward compatibility and saying no to people on things. If you had a magic wand and could make anything you wanted backward compatible with no effort, or didn't have to worry about backward compatibility, what would you change in the language, or what feature would you add to it?
I'll say, because I know it ticks off Brian, I'll say generics.
So you would do it differently, or you wouldn't do it at all?
Oh, well, actually, I think it's a necessary evil, but I would really like to. I can't tell you how much I hate type erasure, so but I'll stop at that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to echo a little bit of Venkat's response in terms of generics, but to me, sometimes medicine is needed, and that's okay. It can't just be syntactic candy 24/7 with every release, and there's some features that are just good to ensure we're keeping the language healthy. And it's one of those there's several instances of medicine moments in the history of Java, and I think it's all to its benefit.
Yeah, and remember, I gave all of you a magic wand. Brian doesn't have a real magic wand, so he has a few more constraints than that.
Well, don't ever take off the language architect. You never know what might disappear.
So I've spent so much time trying to figure out how to make things better and still be compatible that I'm not sure the incompatible part of my brain still works.
Okay.
But I know
Dan,
what I
did you
removed.
change anything?
Yeah, well, I know that the incompatible part of my brain was essentially surgically removed by terror, because several people have said there are literally millions of Java developers out there, many millions of Java developers, and for every absurdly obscure feature or absurdly obscure API, there's a really large community of people who love it.
Yeah, or who rely on it and don't realize it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you hear about that when you're trying to get rid of something.
Well, but we try to do that in a very thoughtful and transparent, open way. So it's not just like rip out and it's gone. A lot of thought and planning go into that discussion before even identifying what there is a target for removal. And the fact that we have the notion of deprecation, it gives developers a chance and opportunity to plan for the potential removal of that. And to make a tree grow healthy, you have to prune it eventually. And so it's no different. That metaphor works with software languages of all types, inclusive of Java. There has to be thoughtful pruning because evolution moves forward, and something that was performant and needed 20 years ago, well, as the platform evolves, the language evolves, it may not have the same level of value today. And so why force developers to carry that forward if there isn't a strong need?
Okay.
Right, and yet Corba is still with us.
I'm probably saying it wrong, but I really like the deprecation of Nashorn. It's like we're thinking about deprecating. Anyone want to take it over? Anyone? It was very well communicated.
We've done that a few times where, we've tried to find a new home for something. Everyone wants to keep it. No one wants to step up to the maintainer. And sometimes you just have to say, we're not, it doesn't make sense to continue investing in this.
Right. But I like that it was well advertised.
Yeah.
It wasn't, we're getting rid of it, take it, or if you will. There was plenty of notice for someone to step up or not.
I mean, it is the job of a parent to be a parent, right? So it's not about likabilities, but it's about what's right for the language.
Yeah. Brian, can you tell us about how the new release cadence is working out and an example of a feature that was impacted by it?
Yeah, so this is something that worked out better than I could have expected. When this idea was first cooked up and, someone said, we should release Java every 6 months. And I thought, you're out of your mind. There's no way that's going to work. And people internally were skeptical, people externally were skeptical. The benefits are obvious, it's easier to plan, you get better predictability, you can deliver, value more often. But the things that I didn't expect were even more interesting. And one of them is we've been able to slash our internal planning process almost to zero, which means I spend almost no time in release planning meetings, and I can spend all of that time in engineering. So we thought originally that it was not going to increase the rate of innovation, only the rate of innovation delivery. It turns out to have done both. And one of the ways that we've really been able to take advantage of that is the ability to dynamically replan features. So when we did pattern matching, we said, okay, we're going to break this up into a bunch of pieces, get people used to it slowly. We'll start out with type patterns an instance of, and we had ideas of like what should come next as the second phase. And we're originally going to do something different in the second phase. And then we realized, no, it makes much more sense to do type patterns and switch as the second thing. And that was something that was trivially easy to replan because there was no committed plan. It was just, what do we think we're going to do after this? And we were able to change our mind when we had more information. And so it's allowed us to focus on the thing that's in front of us and to dynamically replan the things that are ahead of us. And part of the side result has been that our feature pipeline is better than it's ever been. Because it used to be like when we finished Java 8 and the end game for Java 8 was just brutal because, you wanted, the next train wasn't leaving for 3 years. You wanted to make sure everything was on it. And then after that was over, we were kind of out of ideas because we had already delivered everything we'd been thinking about for the last 3 years. And of course, here comes Mr. Project Manager with his clipboard saying, okay, what's going to be in Java 9? And we were saying, please go away. Just let us think for a while. And that's never going to happen again because the list of things that we're ready to do next, if we have more bandwidth, is bigger than we'll ever be able to do.
Okay, so you've got a good backlog. Venkat, do you have any thoughts from the Agile world on how the cadence is working out?
Yeah, that's one of the things that truly fascinated me is that's exactly the point is, we all like to talk about Agile, but for a change, it's nice to see somebody being Agile. And that's one of the really aha moments for me is I often remind developers, Java is not being developed on a 6-month cycle. It's being released on a 6-month cycle. So there was a lot of skepticism when this was announced. It's like, oh my gosh, are they going to just wrap everything together and then release in 6 months? So there was no decrease in quality. On the contrary, the quality is actually even better now because there's a feedback loop that's going where you have a preview feature available. People are able to experiment with it and give feedback back to how it works. And then this willingness to not release a feature if it is not ready. Well, the last time I heard it, it's called the adaptive planning. What an amazing idea. Well, in a sense, Java is being agile to every sense of the word. And one of the other things that fascinates me about the release cycle is, I often say this, when people talk about Java 8, you can ask just about anybody what was great about Java 8. What immediately comes out of their mouth is lambdas and streams. And if I am the developer behind completable futures, that's really sad because that's such an important feature in the language and nobody cares about it. And like, why? Not because it's not important, it's because it was in the shadows of something that was bigger for the time it was released. And I don't think any feature deserves that. And then that's another thing that Java has done really well, is to give us these bite-sized improvements so that as developers, we can consume them and not get overwhelmed. And so it's not just that it's benefited Java, but it's benefiting the features, it's benefiting the users. I mean, every corner I turn, there is benefits to this agility, as you can see.
Yeah, for me, and if I could extend on that, from what both Brian and Venkat mentioned, it was, first of all, when you add something to the language, it's there for a very long time. So you don't want to do that haphazardly because there's a lot of maintenance that needs to go into it. However, with a 6-month approach, this is not about increasing throughput. It's about reducing latency, access to innovation. And so, we go back to this notion of community. How can we participate? Sure, we talk about user groups. Let's collaborate. Let's share best practices and use cases. But to me, the greatest thing developers can do now that we're on this 6-month clip is you have access to early access builds, right? So you can begin testing early and often. And so it just allows you to be better prepared for when something is ready for putting into production. Or for that matter, the notion of incubator and preview features. What a great chance for developers to be part of giving us input and feedback, something that wasn't there in Java 8 and Java 7 and Java 6. We always say that participation is important, and this vector of moving to the 6-month cadence increases the opportunity for inclusion versus decreasing it.
How do you decide when something stops being a preview feature?
So we're still figuring that out. So originally we thought features would go through one round of preview, and then we realized that that wasn't really enough because of the structure of the release and development cycle. So if we're releasing every 6 months, so let's say we're releasing in March and September, well, there is some kind of development freeze that happens before then that happens in December and June. So if a release comes out in March and there's a preview feature and we want feedback on it and we might want to act on that feedback, there's only 3 months from the release to the next development freeze for people to try it out, have feedback, consider the feedback, figure out what changes we want to make the changes, test them, specify them, etc. That's just not practical. So we decided that most, that most features, except maybe the most trivial ones, would go through like a year of preview. It's possible that if we make a big change in the second preview, we may give it a third preview, but we think most of them will go for a year. And we try not to preview something unless we think that we are within a year of being ready to pour the concrete. And it has turned out that with almost every preview feature, we have made at least one minor change, and we're glad that we had that leeway, to make last minute small changes before the concrete was poured.
Next question is for anyone. I think we will all want to avoid Java having the too many features problem and becoming like PL1. How do you go about avoiding that?
Say no a lot.
Is there anything you said no to that you really wanted to do?
So, Sharat said that there were, currently approximately 10 million Java developers, and I suspect at least half of them have written to me and said, I've got a great feature idea for Java. And obviously, we're not going to do statistically any of them, I guess, when you have a number that large. But what I always try to do when people ask me for a feature is ignore the feature that they've asked for, because that's a solution. But imagine what problem they think they are solving. What kind of pain are they in that has caused them to think that this is the right thing and the most important thing that Java should do? And if you synthesize, what you get from having done that with 5 million developers who write to you with feature ideas, you actually come up with a much smaller number of features that solve a much larger number of problems. So rather than reach for flavor of the week or take people at their word when they say, I have a great feature for you, instead try to commune with what pain people are in and imagine what could we do that would alleviate the pain of not just this guy who's talking to me this week, but the last 1,000 guys that have brought up their pet feature.
Yeah, and that's generically good advice outside of programming languages. You know, don't do what people tell you to do, but you know, address their pain instead. I mean, in my career phase as a consultant, I would never let people tell me what to do, or at least if they told me what to do, I would ignore them. And sometimes they got grumpy, but usually not.
Venkat, what are your thoughts for younger developers? What parts of the language should they focus on first?
I was going to kind of latch on to the previous question and add a little bit, if you don't mind. In addition to what was said, one of the things that also is important to me is how each of the features being added don't kind of stick out alone, but work together with other features as well. So for example, right, if you look at records, I don't look at a record as, oh, let's reduce the boilerplate alone. The fact that the records are going to play a good role when it comes to pattern matching really is important to me. So that's one of the things we can avoid bloating of the language by making sure that these features are cohesive and solve a broader problem. And that's one of the things that really excites me. And as far as the younger generation of programmers, you know, as much as I, you know, like languages and I like Java, one of the things I constantly tell my students is, you know, don't assume that there's one way to do things. You know, one of the luxuries, if I may use the word, that the university has given me over the past 30 years is they said, we'll leave you alone, go do what you want to do. As long as you produce value and the students are happy, we will, you know, let you do it. And so I went to them and said, what if I do a course on programming languages? And they're like, yeah, absolutely, go for it. And now I teach a course on programming languages, and I'm not even kidding. Students program in about 20 languages. And my students learn 2 new languages almost every week and a half. So it's extremely fast and accelerated. And my only goal is at the end of the semester, I want them to know that they are problem solvers and not programmers. And that is the most important thing for me, is that these are tools. And as much as these tools are, you know, really good, we shouldn't forget that the tools are meant to solve bigger problems. And so the more tools we learn about, you know, removes that notion in our head that there's one way to do the things and that's the only way I will do it. And then that's all the focus is, to really say, hey, go learn different things and then choose what's better for the problem at hand.
You're on mute now.
Yeah, funny. Oh, there's a fire engine going by. You all didn't get to hear it. Brian, did the module system work out the way you had hoped?
So I think it is going pretty well, but we don't know yet. And the reason we don't know yet is it takes a long time for big changes in the way applications are configured to play out. And so I think a good analogy to the module system is to look at generics. Generics came out in 2004, but they weren't really widely adopted for almost a decade after that. And part of the reason was it was a good 5 years before any library wanted to take on a Java 5 dependency. And so, you know, we're still very early days. What I'm seeing is a steadily increasing number of artifacts in Maven Central with module metadata, steadily increasing number of popular libraries being delivered as modules. So I think the story is really quite good. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there who say, I'm never going to use modularity, and that's fine. They don't have to. We designed it in such a way that you can use it, you can not use it, it's all good. But I do think that it is bringing a little bit of order to the chaos of how Java applications are configured, and people are starting to get some benefits of that.
It's a really good point. The same thing happened with streams and lambdas, that people sort of admired them for a while and then they jumped in and then they were everywhere.
Yeah, 8 was the fastest release adoption we ever had, in part because there was such a huge demand from developers of, we want to start programming with that. But even with 8, it was still a few years before companies would let developers program in Java 8.
James, I was told that I have to ask you, if the Doobie Brothers and the Grateful Dead got in a death match, who would walk out alive? I hope you appreciate the question.
Yeah, I'd have to go for the Dead.
Good to know. Our next topic is other languages, both JVM languages and non-JVM languages. Venkat, is Kotlin a good next step for Java developers? What features in Kotlin would you like to see move to Java?
So one of the things that fascinated me and still fascinates about Kotlin is the low ceremony aspect of it. When I wrote the book on Kotlin, I mentioned that Kotlin to me is like a cocktail. You know, they took Ruby and Python and Haskell and Erlang and Java and C# and put them all into a blender and then just, you know, spin it out. And so it's a language that really adopted a lot of good ideas from a lot of different languages and went on to innovate more. So Java can really look around. Java, of course, you know, you and I know the problem of legacy. So it's easy to, as a user of a language, for me to sit there and, you know, in an armchair and say, oh, the language should do all of these. And Brian is going to cringe when I start saying those things, because that's not the way implementation works on the other side. And so I'm sensitive to that, to not get into the trap of, because the language A does this, language B should do it, because that doesn't always translate that way for various different reasons. But let me take a slightly different twist on that question, is rather than asking the question, what should Java do to change towards Kotlin? Well, that's the phenomenal advantage of being on the JVM ecosystem. You don't need to have a language change to be like another one. And instead, I encourage developers to say, you're not forced to use one language all the time. And I often see languages as vehicles, and you need to be able to switch between them. And so instead of asking Java to change, like name another language, as a developer, learn a few different languages and apply different languages to different layers of your application based on where you find it fit. I think that's a much better strategy than asking a language to change, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's important, especially with Java, when you think about just how the breadth and depth of the ecosystem and the range of applications and use cases that are out there. There's sometimes advantages in being last to innovate versus being first mover. There's last mover advantages here. And so, you know, fundamentally, you don't want to do damage to something that is that broad and deep in terms of users and use cases. And so that's an important factor to consider. But to me, you know, Java's evolving in a way that's thoughtfully adopting some of the components that other languages are presenting. Like, for example, it goes without saying that there's a reason why Python is so popular, just in terms of its ease of use and readability. We're making those you know, similar and if not greater improvements in Java to do the same. But again, without doing harm to the established code base and use cases.
And you know,
Brian, sorry.
I think, you know, I think it's really important for developers to know multiple languages, right? Even if, you know, I do most of my programming in Java, but I think it's really important for every developer to go learn a second language. And if you're a Java developer, you know, Kotlin would not be my first choice of second language, because it's so similar to Java that you're not going to learn a lot new from it. Whereas if you go learn a language like Clojure or Haskell, you know, you will learn a different way of thinking and of attacking problems that you can productively bring back to Java to write better Java code. But the languages that are trying to be a better Java, like Kotlin or Scala perhaps, we have less to learn from them because they are already so similar to what our brains have already imprinted on.
I love that answer, so I'm going to ask everyone else. If you could recommend a second language besides Java for people to learn, what would it be?
So personally, I have absolute fascination for programming languages. And I always say, pick a language that'll make you cry, pick a language that'll make you scream. And for me, that language was honestly Haskell, because I failed learning Haskell 2 times. And I kept going back asking, why is it so hard? And to Brian's point, it was like it wanted me to think differently. And so that's what I would say. Pick a language that is farthest away. And one of the other things I always emphasize to developers is don't learn what's needed at work, because they're going to force you to learn it anyways. So go learn something you have absolutely no use for. And my entire career was built around doing exactly that. When I started learning Java, I had no reason to use Java. And because my job was entirely on C++, my company wouldn't allow me, and I didn't care. And so every single thing I've learned is something that really I felt curious about. So go find something that you're curious about, but something that's so totally different from what you do. And if it hurts, you pick the right thing, keep going.
Pick a functional language for sure, because whether it's Haskell or Idris or Elm, it will give you a different perspective on how to solve problems that you will be able to apply in situations that you didn't realize.
And I apologize. I couldn't resist when Brian said that. I want to second that on, you said learn a functional language, but let me twist it a little bit. Learn a functional language that maps to a dysfunctional language. And Elm honestly made the difference for me, because Elm is 99.9% Haskell, and the rest is F# syntax in it. But it compiles down to JavaScript. It blew my mind, because when I went back to program in JavaScript, it changed the way I program in it, because Elm taught me that you could actually write code differently in JavaScript. So absolutely, this is again a play of different languages together, which is pretty fascinating as well.
Sharat, do either of you have a language recommendation?
So
Well,
I have to say that lately I've become enchanted by Daphne, Dafny, because it's an imperative programming. It's a lot like Java. You can actually generate Java code from Daphne, but it's kind of hard to say whether Daphne is a language or an IDE, because it's got a theorem proving engine behind it, and it's all about building provably correct software. And it's got this enormous theorem proving engine behind it. And it sort of makes lint look like banging rocks together, and it's really lovely. It's hard to write large pieces of code with it, because getting all the assertions right and preconditions and postconditions and all that stuff that people should have learned in their theory of programming courses. But for small, delicate pieces of things, that you write it in Daphne, get the theorem prover happy, export it as Java and use it that way. It's pretty charming.
Bob, do you have a language recommendation?
yeah, it's interesting, because the fascination right now when sometimes speaking, and I know I'm going to come across as an old curmudgeon right now, and I'm showing my age, but a lot of the next generation developers want, obfuscation of complexity, ease of use, readability, simplify it for me, which is all great. But, there's a saying that goes, history matters. And, it's important to understand where some of the programming paradigms come from. And for me, I lean in on where my mother came from, which was she was born in the age of Ada and COBOL and Fortran. And, picking up a COBOL book for a developer in this generation, you can really learn and understand just how evolution has occurred and happened, and how we've gotten to the place we are. And without that historical context, I think we sometimes can make improper decisions in the future. So to me, history matters. I would say any new generation developer, pick up a COBOL book and just the basics, and understand and appreciate where some of these paradigms and fundamentals come from.
Another question for all of you. If you weren't working in IT, what would you be doing?
I've gotten asked this question almost on every panel that I've done, which is
I
great.
know the answer.
So there's two things. I would continue my previous career of being a bartender, because I am a closet mixologist, and I would love to do that again. There's a level of creativity just like in coding. But I would also like to go back to my teaching roots. To me, knowledge transfer is the most rewarding thing I've ever been exposed to. So if I could just take off this hat, I would go back in the teaching profession if it could afford me that livelihood, or even if it couldn't. There's something just very enriching about being able to empower someone to be a better version of them.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I would probably be teaching. I'd probably be teaching math. And, you know, when I sort of wonder what might I do in retirement, you know, I imagine maybe I would go teach calculus at a local community college.
When I was very small, I was always scolded for being too talkative. And I really wanted to be an actor, but I was forbidden from being on stage. So now you know the rest of the story.
All right, we've got about 20 more minutes and we're going to be using them to talk about the future. We got a couple questions along the lines of Java is dead. You know, Java isn't dead. We've been hearing that for 10, 15, however many years. But what's your response to people when they claim that Java is dead or going away?
Wishful thinking.
I was one of those people who kept saying that, actually. So I always say that Java was on the deathbed. They were singing their last rites to it. And then Java 8 came along and I saw it jog on the park, look so healthy. And I'm like, what just happened? So there was a time when Java was going towards the deathbed because the innovation had come to such a slow pace. And to me, I would say Java 6 and 7 was that, because there was nothing really new in the language. And you know my opinion about generics. So what came before that was not as exciting. Generics with out-of-boxing did not please me at all. And from going from there to really appreciating what Java is, with Java 8 and the features coming after that, is a completely different story. So if somebody says Java is dead, I would say just look at what's happened in the past few years, not the distant past. And it's a completely different, vibrant environment than it was only years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Brian had given his rant about ML a little while ago. And, you know, a lot of these things, they feel like this wheel that comes around and around again. Right. I remember a bunch of years ago when Java was going to die because Ruby was taking over. And, you know, one of the big drivers behind the incredible popularity of Ruby was Twitter, because Twitter was, you know, this earth-shattering thing, and it was a big pile of Java code. There are a big pile of Ruby code. But then you know, as that was going on, all the engineering folks at Twitter were realizing that they were having this nonlinear connection between, you know, the number of customers they had and the amount of hardware they had to buy. That Ruby was just causing them to spend dramatic amounts of money, you know, and you know, while it's always been kind of stylish to ignore performance, the fact that Twitter had this meltdown and shifted over to a JVM language, and then the CTO of Twitter became Java's biggest cheerleader. You know, he kind of goes from, you know, pounding nails in the coffin to resurrecting the dead. And it's like, how many more times does that have to happen? It's just a regular thing. And many of these languages become quite stylish. They ignore a lot of the practical stuff. They ignore a lot of the flywheel effects from having like these gigantic libraries. You can find all kinds of weird stuff in the JVM ecosystem.
Lest anyone was worried about Java 7 feeling unloved, someone posted in the chat, what about try with resources and multi-catch? And I got to add NIO because I use that every day. So there's something in every version. It might not be the thing for you, but you know, we wouldn't want any of the versions of Java to feel sad.
But Venkat is right. We did have a dark time. You know, I think the Java 7 days were the dark time, and not surprisingly, they correlate with the days where Sun was so busy going out of business that you know it was hard to focus on technical innovation. And fortunately, we're past that. But I do think that, like, you know, I mean, I joke that saying Java was dead was wishful thinking, but like whenever I encounter someone who wants to push the Java is dead meme, you know, I always ask, well, what's their agenda, right? And very often the agenda, there's a core of bitterness in it of, I love language X and I really wish the whole world would use language X, and if Java would just get out of the way, then maybe X would have its chance. And over the years, the value of X has changed, but you know, the rant is always the same.
That is true. A question for all of you. What's something that is on your near-term radar, trend to watch, whether it's Java or just anything in the computing industry that you would like to put on other people's radars? Tricky question. Everyone's thinking.
Yeah, my problem is that my radar screen is pretty much totally occupied by things like climate change and politics. And, you know, I've spent most of the last decade living in the embedded device world. And, you know, it's all navigation algorithms and how you do secure communications and what's going on with the Earth's geomagnetic field. And it's like, really, that's a thing to worry about?
Well, I don't think I said it had to be about computing, and I'm not touching politics with a poll, but climate change is a good one. Yeah,
no. Well, just because, you know, in my previous job, all of my computing work was in helping people study climate change, and everything was terrifying. And none of it's got better.
So I'm going to crawl out from under the couch now. Does anyone else have a trend to watch?
There are two things that fascinate me, and I think about this quite often. You know, there's an aspect of growing older in the field that's fascinating, and that is you can sit back and reflect on when you were a young programmer or young in the field, and today the things that young developers have to learn is just overwhelming compared to what I had to qualify as. I know stuff when I graduated from college, and that's one end. The other end is the ever-changing nature of what we do. We're talking about microservices, we're talking about machine learning, AI. There seems to be like endless things that we need to really learn and adapt to. And in that regard, I would say one of the key things to really think about is, you know, how do you focus on keeping your interest to learn a few things really well, but at the same time, keep a broad idea of what different things are. And as I interact with a lot of developers around the world, everybody is struggling, you know, how do I keep up with things? And so my radar is not really to go out and look for more things, but to really let my curiosity ride along and look at what I should be fascinated about. You know, things like, for example, Project Loom is something I'm really, you know, excited about. I'm focusing on. And also Java is changing, right, in terms of what it can be in the future. So adapt as it were, rather than being stuck with something that you think is going to be the big thing and it doesn't end up being so.
Yeah, you know, for me, there's a, you know, and I might be going a little higher up in terms of the concept here, but to me, there's a social cause that I think needs to become more prevalent in the world we live in amongst all developers. So we all talk about this notion of innovating, which is great. But to me, there has to be this notion of innovating without doing harm, whether it's doing harm to our environment, doing harm to each other, doing harm to our economy, doing harm socially. We as developers always want to be creative, which is absolutely something that's very rewarding. But in that innovation, we need to take a pause and reflect and decide, is this going to have a benefit for the greater good, or is this, you know, limited in terms of, you know, putting money in purely in someone's pocket at the harm of someone else? And I think there's a social element to all of what we do, and it's, you know, prevalent in the world we're now living in. regardless of how abnormal it may be. But we all as developers and innovators need to look at what is it that I'm doing and what benefit does it have to the world I exist in? Because we're going to hand this off to someone else in the future, whether it's our kids or the next generation of programmers. That can only be there if we're not doing harm and only helping.
I love that Duke's been sitting quietly in the background reading the entire time we've been talking. I don't know if he'll ever finish his book, but he definitely seems to be enjoying it. For new developers, they're learning from books and websites and code and meetups and all of that stuff. What advice would all of you have for new developers or people who are earlier in their career for what should they be looking at or thinking about?
It's okay to be scared. And I mean that authentically. Programming takes a while to master. And when I say master, to me, there's never this notion of being an expert, because once you're an expert, you have nothing new to learn. We always have something new to learn. And so it's okay to be scared, but also realize that, you have an ecosystem to lean in on and gain the support of. Because if you're fearful of something and scared of something, most likely there are 10x more individuals who have that same level. And we, in that fact that we have such a rich ecosystem to share and collaborate with, some of that fear destruction can occur very fast. So it's okay to be scared.
Okay. Anybody else have career advice?
I want to go back to something Shar said earlier about history. I think, so many developers are focused on learning the next thing that they don't go and learn the previous thing. And, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that people should go write some COBOL programs, but, I think understanding the history of how we got here can be very helpful in understanding why people who think that, XYZ is the next thing, why they think that, and what it is actually adding to what we're, over what we're using now versus, because none of these things are truly new. At best, many of them are mashups of ideas that have been kicking around in the industry for 50 years. And the more you know about where we came from, the easier it is to absorb these new things because they will be more familiar.
My recommendation would be to actively seek feedback, because there is so much we learn when others are able to critique what we do. And I would say one of the best ways I've learned is by writing something and having somebody else review it, and then go back and improve on it. I think that's one of the things I hope more and more people can do, is to actively seek feedback and improve based on the feedback.
That is an awesome lead into my next question. I did not plant that. We, the leaders of the New York JavaSIG, wanted to ask Sharat if he had any advice for what we should be looking at in terms of doing next.
I think we need to have another celebration for Java 25 in person. So let's hold that date when the world reopens.
Maybe we can celebrate its 26th anniversary as if it's its 25th. I think we've got a little while for New York. And I think we only have time for one or two more questions. The next question is from the audience. Are there any libraries that you think people should particularly be aware of?
So I am not the right person to get the definitive answer on this, but I am dabbling my toes a little bit in the ML space. And recently there was a Java learning library that was released called Tribio, and I know I'm probably messing up the name, but I'm trying to just understand a little bit more in the ML space, and that's probably a good starting point, especially for Java developers to kind of explore. So maybe they can help me learn and explore and learn at the same time.
Okay. Next question, also from the audience. What do you guys think of Graal?
The JIT or
Graal VM?
Well, to me, innovation is not stagnant, and it's great to see innovation happening in the Oracle Labs team. And there's definitely a need for what Graal VM addresses at this point, and it's very refreshing to see something that's capable of addressing a polyglot environment where, ahead of time compilation is mission critical. It's a good effort, and I look forward to seeing where it goes.
Question for everyone. Is there anything you'd like to share about what you're working on now? Any cool projects or stuff that you're doing?
Cool. So for, most of my life now is centered around ensuring the ecosystem remains healthy. And so if making sure the community and the community has good air to breathe and good information to share, if that's considered cool, then I consider that the one of the greatest jobs I could ever ask for. We just completed Oracle Developer Live, a Java edition, which was just last week. Plans are underway to do another iteration of that, I believe, in 2021. But I am also on the side looking forward to when we can do things face-to-face again. And so there's some ideas swirling. I think there's some folks that are watching that I've been connected with offline, even in, I'm noticing here on YouTube some common faces, but stay tuned for more.
Yeah. Since you asked, the definition of cool is stuff that you're excited about and talk about with a passion. So that definitely meets the definition of cool.
There you go.
Anybody else working on anything?
So the thing that I've been working on, at least this week, is sort of what the next after the next installment of pattern matching is going to be. And I think this is something that where this is going, I think is going to be a little surprising, to Java developers, in the sense that, we looked at what pattern matching is in a number of other languages, and I think we've come up with sort of a unique interpretation that brings pattern matching much more deeply into the object model than has been done in, say, Scala or F# or other object functional hybrids that have embraced pattern matching. And I think when people see where this story ends, they may look at it and say, wow, I didn't notice that was missing all this time, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my big teaser.
James, Venkat, are you guys looking at anything cool?
Nothing to mention as cool. I keep looking at a lot of stuff. For me, I'll be really happy if I slow down what I do, because I seem to be jumping from one meeting to another constantly, that I've been on a 4-hour sleep. So if I can get a little bit more sleep, I'll be really happy, honestly.
Yeah, and I'm super excited about what I'm working on, except that I'd be shot if I talked about it. But getting closer to being able to talk about it.
That's fair. So you're working on something cool that you find fun, and one day we'll know what it is. That's great.
Yeah.
You're recording
And
the video.
whether
so
you care or not, I
now.
don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really fun. I think everybody enjoyed the panel. We still have over 150 people who've been watching the whole time, which is awesome. And of course, we're recording it for posterity. So thank you all for joining us today. We have a few more administrative things to tie things up. First of all, we hope that you will all follow us on Twitter, New York JavaSIG. That's how you can find out about meetings and anything we wish to share. You can also check out our website, javasig.com. Our next meeting will be held on October 6th, Reactive Revolution. The speaker is Josh Long. And our next hands-on workshop, that's where you actually get to type code, is on October 22nd, two-factor authentication, led by Matthew Gillard. I hope I said his name right. And now the moment that you've all been waiting for, the announcement of the prizes. We have many prizes to give away. Rather than me sit here and read names for half an hour and mess up everyone's name, we're going to state one winner out loud, and then we'll be emailing those winners and all of the other winners. And the speakers, if you have somewhere you need to be in the next 5 minutes, feel free to drop off now. If not, feel free to applaud for the winners with me. Our first winner is the commemorative coin, courtesy of Oracle. That goes to Hilmer Shona. And I'm sorry, I know I'm saying everybody's name wrong. I'm bad at names. Yay.
Hilmer Shona, yay. I know, I have his address. I know where to mail that.
Cool.
That's awesome. Congrats, Hilmer.
Our next prize is the ArcConf ticket. The winner for that is Mike Solender. Yay, congratulations, Mike. And there'll be another winner of that as well, which you'll find out by email. The winner of the IntelliJ IDEA license is Darshan Chan. The winner of the ebook on modules, courtesy of Manning, and we all know that modules are coming thanks to Brian, is Dan Seyfried. The winner of a Choice of O'Reilly book is Oleg McKeeve. The winner of a Pearson ebook or video is TJ Rao. The winner of the J Future conference ticket is Vincent Debrev. The winner of a developer advocate ebook courtesy of Azul is Suresh, I'm sorry, I can't try, ANBARASN. And the winner of one of the JFrog t-shirts is Joseph Sharaban. I'm sure I've said practically everyone's name wrong, but you won a prize, so I'm sure that that's okay. Frank, would you like to end things?
Sure. I certainly want to thank all the panelists. That was just an awesome panel. And I want to thank again our leaders and our community, our growing community. Don't forget to join the JavaSIG. You see the Twitter handle there and our website. Please join us. It's just a growing community. We'd love to have you. So sign in. So thanks again, and everybody have a good night. And for people of the future, enjoy the video.